We are talking Cincinnati Bengals football on the Our Football Network and the Our Football YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, especially if you're a Bengals fan. Every time we have our next guest on, John Sheeran from the Orange and Black Bengals podcast. How's it going, John?
I'm doing well, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing good. This is still a pretty cool time of season. We haven't really reached the lull yet. The lull's coming. It's a little low, Is that time you usually schedule your vacations, John?
Yeah, I try to get off whenever I can. I remember when I wasn't doing this for a living, May was still kind of boring because I didn't really care about OTAs and all the other off-season workouts. But now, when we're writing, every single week, we kind of crave these last moments before these guys all go off into summer vacation. And at that point, if you're not taking time off, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, you're in trouble. So. I totally 100% agree. This is still a pretty good time. The only thing you worry about now as a fan is, I don't want to, it's the no news is good news time of season. I don't want to hear anything about if there's some sort of ticker or something with the name on it. I don't want to see that. Please don't give that to me because the only thing that could happen at this point, there's still going to be some deals made. And we'll get into that as well. But for the most part, injuries are unfortunately the biggest issue that you have to deal with at this time of season. Even though they're playing in shorts and all that kind of stuff, it still happens. These are big physical men, and they have to have strenuous activity. We have no idea, and it happens. So
yeah, there's a reason why I'm sure we'll talk about a Bengals player who's not present at off-season workouts right now. There's a reason why he's not there, and that's precisely what you just said.
Yeah. Just a little part of the team, just a tiny bit. Okay, so let's get into this. And I also want to remind everybody too that the Our Lads Draft Review Guide is coming out. This is last year's, so you can see we had Richardson on the cover last year. I'm not sure who we're going to have on the cover this year, but this was last year, so this will come out soon. So you got to go ahead and order that. The Our Lads Draft Review Guide, the Our Lads Draft Guide is already out. So, matter of fact, I believe every player the Bengals picked, except for Matt Lee, the very last pick, I believe that is the only player that does not have a scouting report in this guide. So 9 out of 10 scouting reports. So this is still a good time to take this. And again, you can get it either through hard copy or PDF. So we're going to go over all that right now. As we break down all the players, you can see the depth charts at ourlads.com, the best depth charts in the business. And first things first, what was the reaction regarding the draft itself from the fans' side?
I think it was different than in years past because the Bengals took a lot of perceived risks, at least from the surface, in regards to players who dealt with injuries, players who were a bit on the older side, and maybe players who didn't finish their college careers on such a high note in some cases. There were some picks that I think made a lot of sense and checked a lot of boxes for what the Bengals typically looked for, but I think there was a mixture of excitement and also maybe caution in regards to, okay, these are pretty big swings, specifically in the early parts of the draft, and if they work out, then this looks like a phenomenal draft class. Looking back in hindsight, and if they don't work out, this was a very important draft of 10 picks in this interesting part of the Joe Burrow era where they're replacing a lot of veterans, they're replacing a lot of known commodities in the locker room. And as that contract that Burrow has, gets deeper and deeper into, the length, obviously the salary cap space is going to be at a premium and everything like that. So just taking advantage of these players who are on rookie contracts and getting something out of them, at least in the early parts of their careers, is very critical. And this draft was very important, and just continuing to make sure that whatever Super Bowl window is open remains open. So there was a lot of that kind of going around, but I think the excitement of the upside for a lot of these players, for one way or another, has really carried over into these past couple of weeks for sure.
All right. Did you have yourself an overall grade?
I did, yeah. So funny you mentioned Matt Lee. Matt Lee was actually the player that bumped it up from a C+ to a B- for me. Wow. I think it's right above average, or it's right above average, factoring in the talent, the caliber of players that these guys have, but also with their risks that come with it, whether it be injuries, whether it be off-field or slight character concerns. I think for the most part, all these guys are very talented and can find very clear roles with the team. And I think that's another thing that was kind of different compared to maybe in years past, where you had some premium picks come to the Bengals and not have and either change positions or be kind of moved around too much. We've seen it with Dax Hill, we've seen it with Jackson Carman, Zach Carter, the list goes on and on. But you're talking about, they drafted the right tackle in the first round, Amarius Mims. He's going to be a right tackle at the very least next year, if not a swing tackle this year. Kris Jenkins, bona fide 3 technique / 5 technique, going to be an interior guy on the defensive line. Jermaine Burton, vertical wide receiver, can line up in the slot, can line up outside. Erick Gall, Tanner McLaughlin, those are your tight ends. Josh Newton is a quarterback. So like very clear roles and very clear expectations for a lot of these guys. And I think out of these 10 players, you can expect a handful of them to contribute immediately. So all of that combined with they're not quite slam dunks with their overall profiles. So I think it was still an above average draft, and I think Matt Lee really capping off makes it 2 competent athletic offensive linemen that they've drafted, and that's just a rarity just in one draft class for the Bengals. So that in itself bumped it up to B- for me.
Well, let's start there. Let's start on the offensive line with those 2 players then, the first and the last picks of the draft. First round, overall, number 18. And then Lee, of course, was the last pick for the Bengals in round 7. Everybody knew that Mims was like the one like freakish looking athlete, player with elite strength, 6'7", 340. But there are some people who believe, matter of fact, Arlade's even kind of put it as sort of like, it's either a home run or maybe a strikeout, complete, so it can go either way. This is swing for the fences kind of deal. It could be a tremendous player or it could be a bust. And the bust labels there only because of the limited experience. That's really it. And because once you have that limited experience tag, you've only had, 8 starts, I believe, in his college career. That's just not a lot. But the high side, the ceiling, looks really good. And if he's coached up and they feel like they've got the right guy, there's a lot to like there. And then, of course, you mentioned getting a center, which we had talked about the last couple of seasons. Would they want to upgrade Ted Karras at some point? Now, I know it's the 7th round, but you know what? A lot of times really good centers are drafted in the 7th round.
Yeah, and of course, if you're looking for interior guys, you can find hits on day 3. But when you're talking about offensive tackles, like the very best, you can only find them really in the beginning of the draft. And I think that was exactly what the Bengals were thinking here. They knew that this tackle class was unlike a lot in recent memory. And with Mims specifically, we were talking about it leading up to the draft, and then Dan Pitcher, the offense coordinator, said himself, if Mims played like a full season this past year, he's probably not making it 18 picks into the draft because the tape that he put on display at Georgia was phenomenal. But like you said, it was just very limited. So the fact that there wasn't a large sample size with that high quality play definitely bakes in a certain type of risk of, is this sustainable over the course of a 10-year NFL career? The positives though are just extremely positive though. He's 21 years old, an elite athlete at his size. Greg, he's actually at 350 now. He measured at 340 at the combine, but they added on 10 pounds of muscle already to his very immense frame, and the coaches apparently want him to play at around 350 pounds, and everyone knows that he can definitely carry that weight because he carried 340 like I've never seen a player who's 340 pounds move before. So all the measurables and the athleticism is there, and you need that to be a high-end elite offensive tackle. And the tape is quality too. Like there's not a lot to pick at it with his pass protection. I think he's still a little bit raw in the run game, which is why I don't think they're expecting him to start right away. They have Trent Brown who can do that at least for this year and however many games that he does play. But yeah, it was unfortunate that he got injured, but I don't think they're really concerned about any long-term risks there. There's a very clear reason as to why he got injured in the first place and why he suffered those setbacks. Typically with those tightrope ankle surgeries, it can lead to some re-aggravation and it can lead to a hamstring injury, which is exactly what happened over the course of the following months. But an elite tackle on tape that was only there because of his limited experience.
Yeah, his developmental time, and you mentioned Trent Brown, because I'm pretty sure when we spoke, as a matter of fact, I know when we spoke and we were previewing the offseason, there was a hole there. And yeah, that was a big need, the right tackle. We all knew that. So they went out, they got Trent Brown, and then drafted Mims. So is it just as simple as that? Brown's there for 1 year. Mims will definitely, as long as everything goes well, he'll be the 2025 right tackle. And is there anything else that Mims can do? Is he kind of stuck out there as a right tackle, and that's just going to be where he's going to play? Do they have any hopes that he could play any other positions if anything arises regarding injuries? What have you heard so far?
They didn't necessarily rule out like moving into guard, but again, I just being 6'8" with that
I
length,
know.
you're just a tackle at that point, and
Yeah.
like they're not going to have any competition at the guard spots this year. Alex Kappa's there; he's a solid veteran. He's there for 2 more years. They've invested a lot of time and resources in developing Cordell Wilson at left guard, so they didn't want to have any competition there either. Orlando Brown, the whole reason why he joined the Bengals is because he wanted to be a left tackle, and they gave him the opportunity to play that position for the next handful of years. So right tackle is where Mims obviously played at Georgia. Trent Brown is here for a year, but in his 9 seasons in the NFL, he's only completed 3 of them, whether it be from injuries or suspensions or whatever the case may have been with him in New England and Oakland at the time. So I don't think it's out of the question that Trent Brown goes down at some point this season, whether it be from like a minor injury or whatnot. Mims comes in, he plays pretty well, and maybe he just takes over from there. And it's just like, that's it. Trent Brown is your swing tackle backup for the rest of the year, which is a phenomenal situation for the Bengals, who never seem to have a fully healthy offensive line by the time the playoffs come around. So just having that depth, whether it will be Mims or Brown as your swing tackle, and I'm sure they're going to give Mims reps at left tackle as a backup just this year, just because the depth there is very critical. But yeah, it's going to be Trent Brown who's going to be penciled in as the week 1 starter. And if things change in training camp, things change. But that seems to be the plan for this year.
All right, and what do you think about? Because now you said it, your grade went from C plus to B minus just by adding a 7th rounder. Mm-hmm. So what is it that you like, or more specifically, do the Bengals like about adding Matt Lee to the room?
So it's not the biggest revelation because, NFL teams don't grade 250 draftable players. So Matt Lee was graded as a 5th round player in the Bengals' eyes, which I guess is like the bottom in terms of like guys that they would consider drafting. And he was just there in the 7th round. But I honestly think that he could have been drafted earlier, considering what his profile was coming out of college. He was a 5-year quality starter at 2 programs, and a really elite athlete for the center position too. Like, we're not talking JC type athlete. I think that's very comparable for the type of athlete and the type of physical player that Matt Lee is. I think people kind of coin him as that light body, maybe finesse zone blocker, but I think he gains a lot of power. I think he does a good job of displacing guys in the interior. So you're talking about a well-rounded center with high quality tape, high quality production. I think he only allowed like maybe 2 sacks in his entire career there, both at Miami and Central Florida. So there was just not a lot of knocks with him, aside from the fact that he was a bit small, right? He's 6'3". I think he's listed at like 290 on the Bengals website, but I think he measured in and weighed in a little bit more than that at the combine. We'll see what his actual playing weight is, but this year when Ted Karras at being, the last year of his contract, I think that is a perfect ramp for Matt Lee to develop behind him, learn as much as he can from one of the more experienced players on the Bengals roster, and have a chance to compete for that starting job in 2025. And bringing that quality of athlete that we know can play football. He was good in college, so there's reason to believe that he can be good in the NFL, but really quality in terms of athleticism, that's just something the Bengals have lacked severely, not even in recent memory, but just in the past like 10 years when the offensive line was continuing to have trouble, like just keeping their quarterbacks protected and healthy and whatnot. So to bring in 2 high-quality athletes who I think can be starters in 2025, it definitely reshapes what that starting group looks like in the future, and I think that was so important this year, considering how this past year ended when a lackluster offensive line in terms of athleticism unfortunately ended up resulting in another Joe Burrow injury.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was two players that were added on from the draft, okay, on the offensive line. And they did add, obviously, Trent Brown in free agency. Do you think, because this is another question I wanted to get to at the end of this conversation, but I think this is a good time to do it. Do you think they added enough offensive linemen? And do you think that they probably will add some more before it's all said and done to increase the depth?
So I think for what we could have expected, they did as much as as any Bengals fan could have wanted.
Okay.
If it were me, I would have added a guard. I think this year was a really good year to add that, third, fourth, fifth round player at the position to push Cordell Volson. I understand why they may want to just leave that spot alone and just add a guy for depth, because again, it's been 2 years of developing and coaching this guy from the fourth round that they view as like a really valuable piece to the starting lineup, considering they're paying him pennies essentially, and he's been one of their more healthy and durable starters, and he has gotten better since he came into the NFL in 2022. But I do think that you could easily upgrade that spot with a higher rated player coming out of college, someone who's got maybe more experience against quality opponents, maybe even a better athlete. And I don't even think Volson is that bad of an athlete, but again, the bar for athleticism for Cincinnati was on the offensive line was just so low that it would not have taken much to really raise it. And of course, Mims and Lee do a great job of raising that bar, but I do think another guard to have pushed Volson, or at the very least backed up both Volson and Kappa, because the depth there at the guard spot is not very good. So that's still probably the last piece that they really needed to really elevate this room. But in general, I think for the Bengals' sake, because they've just been so just bad just developing and adding offensive linemen, I think they did as well as we could have expected.
And it's not like they were dealing with any injuries last year, because they were very healthy. So it was just all about talent, and they definitely got a little bit of an upgrade so far this offseason. And the other thing that you obviously correctly pointed out was the need for that upgrade due to the division that the Bengals are playing in, and all of the elite pass rushers that they were going to be playing against 6 times a season. So they've been able to accomplish that at least a little bit, or like you said, to satisfactory at the very minimum so far this offseason. Okay, let's stick with the offense, and let's go with the third round pick, Burton. So anyway, full disclosure, Burton was one of my dynasty draft picks in the rookie draft this year. So I needed some receivers, and I got a couple of them, and Burton was one of my top receiver add-ons. So I really like the kid. I think he's got great upside. We talked about how they needed to improve the slot position this year and possibly the outside in 25. What does this one player, and again, we got to include, this is a good discussion because we got to include the young guys from last year. We have to include the franchise tag player and T. Higgins, and where you think he may be going and playing this year. But let's start with Burton.
Yeah, with Burton, I think it was telling that they went after him over some other receivers that they could have taken in the third round. Like Jalen McMillan, I think a lot of people had pegged to be like the true Tyler Boyd replacement if they just wanted just a true slot receiver to take over that role. And by taking Burton, who had experience in the slot at Alabama, I think at least in his first year there, and then he was more on the outside and back in 2023, I think it was a message saying that there is no true Tyler Boyd replacement on the roster this year, and that's by design. You have a tight end in Mike Gesicki, who mainly lines up in the slot. You have Jamar Chase, who, at least in the past couple of years, they've been trying more and more to get him inside and give him more favorable matchups, just like Tyreek Hill gets in Miami, just like Justin Jefferson gets in Minnesota. I think that's also the plan with Chase. And with Burton, I think you'll see him equally inside and outside, depending on what type of personnel packages you have there. I think it's easy to just, obviously he's the third most talented receiver on this team behind Chase and Higgins. I think you can probably elevate him over Yoshevich and over Charlie Jones, definitely over Trenton Irwin, just because of draft status and really just how he looked in college. And he's already kind of showing, providing dividends in the early parts of these offseason workouts. He definitely does look the part of a natural hands catcher with a lot of explosion. And the ability to have him line up inside and outside really opens up, I think, the offense to allow you to put either your tight end in the slot and to put Chase in the inside, or maybe take Chase off the field whenever he needs a breather and not lose any explosion. Just like in years past, whenever you would have like T. Higgins or Jamar Chase dealing with injury, you would lack a lot of speed and explosion on the boundary that would really grab attention from the cornerbacks and would really just it would just close off the offense and what they could do. So just adding another explosive receiver with alignment versatility, where you don't have to have Chase on the outside when you have these three receivers on the field. You can move them on the inside, and you can have trust that third receiver can generate separation and keep cornerbacks honest and not just just clouding those routes just like they've done in years past. So that was the whole, I think, vision with Burton. I don't know what alignment he's going to play most this year, but I know for a fact he's going to play multiple of them, and it's going to open up what they can do with Chase.
And is this, though, because this is what I believe, that 2025 they look at Burton as being the number 2 receiver on this team?
That's a fair assumption, yeah.
Okay. Talk about T. Higgins. Where's he going to play this year?
I mean, I don't think T. Higgins' role is changing. I think they wouldn't mind like moving him inside a little bit more. Again, like the removal of Tyler Boyd, I think definitely opens up a lot of the versatility with these receivers. But I think Higgins' role is mainly going to be the same. He's going to show up, I'm assuming, after that 3rd preseason game, sign the tag, practice for maybe a couple days, maybe a week at most, and then try to have the best season possible so that he can up his value if he reaches the free agency market in 2025. But he obviously has every reason to want to maximize his value now. He certainly has a price for himself. He and his camp have a price that they want to reach whenever he does reach the open market, and just staying healthy and playing a full season, a full quality season that T. Higgins was able to do for the first 3 years of his career. Like, that's definitely objective number one, and the Bengals are going to give him a definite chance to do that, because there's not 2 receivers on this team that are better than T. Higgins. Then that remains to be the case despite the drafting of Jermaine Burton. But yeah, like I don't expect him to show up until the end of the preseason. I would suppose if there is a topic of discussion, it's going to be because there is a new offense coordinator and Dan Pitcher has made some new wrinkles to what he wants this scheme to be. Obviously, Zach Taylor's still the play caller, and the foundation of the offense remains the same. But I do wonder, because there is a slight coaching change and a change in how the offense is going to look, I do wonder if that's going to impact how productive Higgins can be out of the gate. Because obviously he's talented enough to just show up and just catch five passes and 70 yards and whatnot. But maybe just the lack of experience in the details with this specific iteration of the offense, it might impact him early on in the season. But if he stays healthy, I don't expect him to be anything less than what he usually is when he's healthy.
Is everybody kind of on the same page now? Like, okay, we understand what's going on here, and we're going to make the best of this. And even though I'm only going to be here one more year, like you said, I'm going to try my hardest, not just for money, but this is a shot also at having the best possible weapons to win a Super Bowl.
Oh, 100%. And in years past, even going back to like week 17 of last season, Higgins was dealing with an injury against the Chiefs. It was the Bengals' last chance to make the playoffs. And he was in a contract year. He didn't know he was going to get the franchise tag, and he came back into that game when it seemed like all hope was kind of lost, and he played through injury. And I think that sent a message, I think, to the team and to the fans that if there's a possibility that T. Higgins is going to like sit out and maybe nurse some injuries and protect himself, like obviously it's what he's doing now, because there's a clear difference between practicing and playing in the games and whatnot.
Yeah.
But no, I think he's definitely committed to playing this season and trying his hardest. And it really is a very similar, if not the same exact situation, to Jesse Bates, who also struggled in a contract year, dealt with injuries, was begrudgingly placed on the franchise tag, held out that offseason with the franchise tag, and ended up showing up and playing a pretty decent last year of his contract, and definitely gave the Bengals defense a chance of going back to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, didn't work out in 2022, but there was never an issue. There was never an issue of communication or trust or just not being on the same page with Bates and the Bengals. And it seems as if things are going the same way with Higgins and the Bengals for sure.
Did you envision this a couple of years ago? Was the writing always on the wall that both Higgins and Boyd would not be here, and it would just be Chase?
No, I think that it was February last year. I was like, okay, there's a 75% chance that Higgins is going to get the tag and a 24% chance that he's going to be extended. Unfortunately, the 24% was a little bit too much, but the tag was always, I think, the most likely scenario here, considering who Higgins' agent was and the fact that the Bengals have not been able to strike up a deal with Athletes First and David Mulugheta. So that was always kind of in the back of everyone's mind, and now it's obviously unfolding exactly like that. But I definitely didn't think that Tyler Boyd was gonna come back on another deal, just because I think he's 30 this year.
Yeah.
The fact that he's more of a limited player in terms of he can only play in the slot, and the Bengals clearly wanted to move on with that, with just this next evolution of what the offense can and should be. So I expected Boyd to be gone, but I also expected Higgins to at least be tagged, and here he is tagged.
All right. And by the way, Charlie Jones, I know he didn't get a chance to play much last year. And this could be for fantasy football fans out there as well that might be watching. But overall, the hope level that he is going to be an important part of the receiving corps.
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of work this offseason in training camp to put himself over fellow 2023 pick Andre Yoshevitz, who played more last year. Yoshevitz obviously wasn't as hurt as Charlie Jones was. He dealt with a thumb injury that kept him out several weeks. And yeah, I think that really hindered his development, and it gave Yoshevitz a chance to get some more reps over him. And he put those reps to the test and caught like 4 touchdowns last year as a rookie, which for a 6th-round pick is pretty rare. So the fact that Higgins is not going to be practicing with the team for the next several months, it does give Yoshevitz and Charlie Jones a chance to get more reps and develop more chemistry with Joe Burrow and really figure out, you know, whose roles are whose in this offense, in this receiving corps, because Yoshevitz is more of the outside guy and Charlie Jones is going to be competing for snaps in the slot. And the fact that they don't have like a true slot wide receiver now, like Charlie Jones, I think is going to get reps along with Trenton Irwin for that spot, at least early on, and they're going to see, you know, how comfortable Jermaine Burton is in that role too. Again, though, I don't think there's going to be like this guy is the slot receiver, he's only playing in the slot and he's going to start. But Charlie Jones can definitely take those snaps as they kind of rotate guys in and out of the season, and hopefully he kind of proved himself in training camp to do that.
All right. Now, let's stick with the receivers because there were 2 tight ends taken in the draft. Speaking of the slot, one of those tight ends, Erick, can be used in that position as well. A lot of experience, first from Michigan, then Iowa. Excellent route runner, really good hands. Obviously, he has the injury issues over the last couple of seasons. That's the big deal. But Bengals didn't seem to worry too much about that because he was, 4th-round draft pick. And then McLaughlin is a very interesting player as well. He's one of my favorite 6th, 7th-round sleepers. I really like the kid. I think he could do a good job. He's got some development to do, but good hands, good yards after catch ability. I like what I saw out of his short time in Arizona. So what is the prognosis for a position, as we also know, isn't used effectively all that much and seems to always be a turnstile every year. There's a new guy, a new number 1 tight end on the roster, but now they've got 2 rookies. So hopefully these guys can do a better job than, I guess, maybe Drew Sample, hang around and be productive in the receiving game. What do you think that they've got there with those 2 kids?
You were definitely right about the perception of the position. And I think when they signed Mike Gesicki to a 1-year deal like they did Irv Smith, like they did Hayden Hurst in years past, I think a lot of people were thinking, yeah, this is just Groundhog Day again. And they're going to just go with the 1-year route again. So it was a surprise, I think, when they drafted not 1 but 2 tight ends. I think with 10 picks, people expected a single tight end to be taken. But I think with McLaughlin specifically, that was a player that they graded much higher than the 6th-round pick, and they were kind of surprised he was there. So now there's 5 tight ends on this team that can legitimately make the Week 1 roster. And I personally think all 5 are going to make it because I think Drew Sample, he really found a niche last year as almost like a 3rd-down pass-protecting running back. He lined up in the backfield quite a bit, and they used him a lot in not only pass protection, but also as like a check down option in the flat. And because they didn't have a guy like Samaje Perine, who they lost the year before, and Drew Sample surprisingly filled that role, at least in the passing game, fairly well. And I don't think that they're going to necessarily shy away from that again this year because it worked so well last year. So I would almost list Drew Sample as like an H-back. At this point, he's still going to line up as an inline tight end because he's by far their best blocker as like the true Y position. So he's still going to see snaps there. But I think that's the way to fit those 2 rookies along with like your 2 receiving options in Gesicki and Hudson. And I think both of those guys playing the same position is perfect. Hudson is the ideal backup for a guy like Mike Gesicki, who you don't want to rely on for a full 17-game slate, even though he performed well in a small sample last year. Hudson did, but Gesicki is that true vertical threat that they haven't had at the position. And with Erick All, I think he's like the ideal day 3 tight end that can develop into a starter. Obviously, the injury history is a bit concerning. I think the back injury ended up being a little bit overblown, according to him. Like it was something that was bothering him but he called it like a life-changing surgery because it was life-changing to him. It wasn't necessarily like a complex operation that he had to go through, and it's not an issue anymore. Obviously, he's coming back from the torn ACL, which is a whole different type of thing. You have to, continue to monitor that knee to make sure that it is healthy throughout the course of his career. But by far, I think Erick All is like their most all-around tight end in terms of just what he can do, because he can block in line, he can block as like a lead blocker, he can run routes with a hand in the dirt at the wide position, but he can, like you said, he can also line up out wide in the slot. So there's not a lot that Erick All can't do at the position, but unfortunately he's just not practicing right now because of that knee injury. So maybe McLaughlin gets some more reps in the meantime while All is dealing with an injury. But I really do think that in a year, like, Erick All is probably going to be the starting tight end of this team, and he's going to be their most well-rounded, all-around tight end that they've had in a minute.
Yeah, I think if take those injuries out of the equation the last 2 years, I think he's a second-round draft pick. That's easily the talent. Yeah, so I know I'm a Michigan fan, so I'm pretty close to understanding what kind of kid he is. All right, that's on offense. By the way, before we move over to the defense, and we did talk about maybe another offensive lineman, is there anything else right now that you think the Bengals need to do to improve their depth, or do you think they pretty much got it right at this point?
I think a lot of people were surprised that they didn't draft a running back. They signed Noah Cain and Elijah Collins as undrafted guys, but I think they could stand to improve their depth there. I think Trayvon Williams at best is an RB3, and you're not giving him extended touches there. He kind of emerged as a kickoff returner last year, maybe with the new kickoff return rules, because it's now like a glorified running play. Maybe he'll see more value there, but I think just in terms of depth as pure runners behind Zach Moss and Chase Brown, who are going to get pretty even splits in terms of touches, they could have stand to do a little bit better there. But Trayvon Williams is fine; he's okay.
Okay, so that's the idea. Again, another fantasy tip out there is you believe it's pretty much going to be a 50-50 backfield split.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect either of these guys to go over like 20 touches consistently. Maybe there's some weeks where Moss gets 15 carries. Maybe there's some weeks where Chase Brown gets 12 or 13 carries, but it's not going to be what it was with Joe Mixon back there.
Okay, and look, for Bengals fans out there, we will be doing at least one more interview before the season starts. So I know we're probably going to rehash this, but this is as good a time as any to kind of get some of these questions going. Okay, now let's go on defense. And the team added a couple of defensive tackles. This was the team's biggest need, so they sure went after it pretty hard with a second rounder and a third rounder. So what's the difference between adding Jenkins and Jackson?
So Jenkins, as I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, I think he's your true 3 technique that rotates in and out with B.J. Hill and Sheldon Rankins. And their whole goal, I think, in the offseason, with or without DJ Reader, was going to have that rotation of 3 guys that can play multiple spots. And Rankins is I don't expect him to move off of 3 technique pretty much ever. Maybe he's sometimes the 2I in some cases, but I think with BJ Hill specifically, they signed him to a 3-year deal a couple years ago, and he was coming off of a year where he was going in and out of the lineup with Larry Ogunjobi. Both of those guys were keeping the other fresh throughout the season, and that was the best year that BJ Hill had as a Bengal. And they haven't had that kind of rotation since then, because their backup has been Zach Carter or it's been J2 Faley. It's just been guys who just haven't been getting the job done in extended snaps. So Kris Jenkins, as you know, you're a Michigan guy, like he can hold down his gap. He can even 2-gap in some cases because he's athletic and long enough to do so from either 2I, from either 1 technique, 3 technique, 5 technique. You can put him in multiple technique spots, and you can keep BJ Hill fresh throughout the year. This is his last year as a Bengal, and they expect him to, kind of produce at the level that he did during that Super Bowl run. So you're going to have those 3 guys kind of go in and out. And with Jackson McKinnley, it's tough because they needed a nose tackle, and obviously McKinnley, profiles as one. I don't think he's going to go outside of the A-gaps, if you will. But he's not the same nose tackle that DJ Reader was, and that's really unfair to put that label on anyone. But I think specifically with McKinnley, he was more of that upfield rusher from the 1 technique spot, that real shaded guy that can get upfield and maybe give you some pressure here and there. But in terms of like 2-gapping and doing the things that DJ Reader did at such an elite level, I don't know if that's the right label for him, but he's still going to be that that nose tackle that either is head up on the center or is just shaded off to the right or left of him, and it gives you a body there because they had no one else that could man that position. Honestly, I wouldn't put it past Kris Jenkins to take some snaps there and do a really good job at that, just because of just how dominant of a run defender he is and how powerful and explosive and long he is. But McKinnley is going to be that true nose tackle, and I really do wonder what schematic alterations they're going to make as they move on from the DJ Reader portion of that defense with those specific fronts, and just how to fit McKinnley Jackson in there, because again, it's similar positions, but I think two very different types of players that are going to force the Bengals to kind of do things a little bit differently. But those are definitely your top 4 defensive tackles at this point.
Yeah, and then we talked about whether or not they needed some depth on the defense outside up front, especially at left defensive end. And they did add one prospect in round 6, Cedric Johnson. Now, it's a little bit later in the draft. That's basically a depth piece. But look, Myles Murphy was in last year's draft still. What do you think about the addition of Johnson? Do you think it's just a body, or do you think this is a player that can be a part of the rotation in a couple years?
I wouldn't put it past Cedric to maybe push someone off the roster this year. I think 21 years old, really fast and explosive. Wasn't as productive as Ole Miss as you may have wanted, but he's at least got experience. I think just because both Joseph Asai and Cam Sample are still on the team, and they give you depth there, and they obviously are experienced. They've been in the system for 3 years now. But at least with Sample, he's never been that explosive of an athlete. He's always been kind of limited as a pass rusher, and he's never been that dominant of a run defender, at least in limited snaps. I think there's a good chance that Cedric Johnson can prove to be more valuable than a guy like Cam Sample throughout training camp in the preseason. Now, he's going to have to ball out as a pass rusher, but they've needed that depth because Joseph Asai, at least last year, he dealt with a knee injury that really limited him throughout the early part of the season, and it just never really clicked throughout the later part of the season. And Myles Murphy had to be relied on more and had to grow up a lot quicker than I think a lot of people expected. So he became the third defensive end in this rotation, and he, I think, exceeded some expectations of how productive he was early on, but they still needed another person to really just fill out that room and make sure that Hendrickson and Hubbard aren't just dragging on by the end of the season, and make sure that they're fresh, just like they hope that BJ Hill and Sheldon Rankins are fresh, by the time December and January rolls around. So I wouldn't put it past Cedric Johnson to push one of Asai or Sample off the team, or maybe just force them to keep 6 edges and maybe 5 and maybe just go heavy along the defensive line, because from an athleticism standpoint, I think he's got an edge over at least one of them, and it'll all take is just one really quality preseason to make a statement there. Yeah,
and he's one of the players that they picked up that has 4 years of starting experience, so that helps. Mm-hmm. And especially playing in the SEC, that is definitely what you're looking for. A lot of it now is up to coaching for sure. And it helps too, I believe. I'm not sure. Is it actually? I'm not sure if it was Johnson or Jackson. I think it was Jackson actually. That was the he was the two-year team captain. Yes. How important is that, by the way, to Tobin and the team? Is that something that you've noticed that is really important, or not necessarily?
It depends. I think you can count on a handful of captains being drafted by the Bengals every year. I think with captaincy, it's the easiest thing that we on the outside can see, because it's always in like Brugler's scouting reports and whatnot, and it's something that we highlight. But I think the qualities of what make a captain are what the Bengals are really after, and they can try to identify that, interviewing them and getting to know them throughout the process. So I think with Johnson, I don't know if he was a captain at Ole Miss, but he did win some award for being the most courageous and the most dedicated player on the defensive side of the ball, and he did that at 21 years old. So I think that was that's just one of those nuggets that tell you about a guy's work ethic and character, and they obviously want as many guys like that as possible. Kris Jenkins, obviously really dedicated in the weight room and a really charismatic, energetic guy that has future captain written all over him. Amarius Mims was never really looked at as the captain type because he was so young, but he's also really dedicated in practice and was really, addicted to really bettering his craft even when he wasn't playing. So just those types of attitudes and those types of characters, I think, are always going to be valued by the Bengals. And sometimes they're captains and sometimes they're not.
And speaking of having maybe 11 players on the defensive front. That could be possible based on the fact of what kind of defense the Bengals run, primarily two linebackers. It's possible they could keep just two on the bench, which would open up that extra spot along the defensive line. We have one more position to go to, and that's the secondary with the two add-ons. Josh Newton in round 5, and is it Dejan Anthony?
Yes.
Also from Ole Miss. Anthony, is he going to be looked at? They're going to try to see, all right, where does he fit in? Slot, safety kind of deal. Just going to play him and see where he goes, or do they have a spot for him? And then, of course, Newton, he was the earlier draft pick, and he played in a lot of big games. We saw him playing big games a couple of years ago when TCU played in the national championship. So he's a player that could easily have been a few rounds. I think nobody would have been surprised after that championship game season, that Newton would have been maybe a 3rd-round draft pick. But he goes in round 5 instead.
That was something that a lot of us kind of learned right after he was picked. He was projected, I guess, this year to be in that 5th, 6th round range. And when looking at the numbers and the production and the tape from 2023, when TCU wasn't as good, I think is definitely what kind of tanked his projection in stock. But they were obviously looking at his full body of work, and coming from, I believe it was Louisiana Monroe as a transfer, and another guy who I don't think was a captain to TCU, but like just really infectious energy and a really just high character, high work ethic type player. And I think that shows in this game because he didn't test like an elite athlete, which I think is going to hinder him in terms of either starting on the outside or just playing on the outside, but always being around the ball, being really physical in his coverage, and making a lot of quality tackles. I think that was something that attracted him to them, and the fact that he can play in the slot, as well as Anthony too. Like Anthony played all over the secondary with Ole Miss. Mike Hilton, obviously an Ole Miss guy who's undersized and made his living playing the slot. I think they kind of viewed him as a similar type player. Unfortunately, though, for both these guys, like they just have a lot of players who can play in the slot at this point, and not a lot of depth at outside cornerback. So I think because of that, Newton is going to see most of his reps, at least this year, on the boundary to back up guys like Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Turner. I mean, hell, they have Dax Hill there now, and he's never been an outside cornerback. So like they needed that. That's honestly one of the positions where they probably should have invested more resources this offseason, whether it be like a veteran free agent or an earlier draft pick. And I don't think Newton's like a bad player, but I don't like foresee him being a starter necessarily, just because he's never been that quality of an athlete on the outside, and like that's something that they value very highly for that position. And with Anthony, I think there's a chance that he can maybe push a guy like a Tyson Anderson off the team at safety, or if they go maybe 5 deep at safety, that's a way for him to get there. But I think he is going to be sort of that box type player who can sometimes line up in the slot. It definitely seems to be where he was most effective at Ole Miss.
Okay, so you envision him more as a safety than a slot corner.
Yeah, just because the composition of the secondary right now, they're just really deep in slot, and that's the last position that you want to have more bodies compared to like free safety or cornerback,
Unless, of course, like you said, and again, I don't know if they would. There are a bunch of veteran safeties out there still. That might be the one position that is stocked still with a handful of quality, talented, maybe even starting players. So we'll find out where those guys go. Even though we know just a couple of years ago the Bengals played Bates and Bell, and that was it for a couple of years. Now Bell comes back. Were you surprised that Bell came back?
No. I think as soon as he was released, everyone in the know was saying that this is probably like a matter of when, not if. So okay. When it happened, I think we were all kind of expecting it for sure.
All right, and then let's also then talk about what you think that they need to do, or you still feel there are some particular holes on the defensive side. What didn't they accomplish in your mind?
So they didn't draft a linebacker, but I think the 2 undrafted guys they brought in have a good chance of making it as like the 5th guy. I think either Aaron Casey or Maima in Jogmeta can beat out one of Devin Harper or Shaka Hayward. So I'm perfectly okay with how they handled linebacker. But like I said with nose tackle, they were never going to replace DJ Reader with just one guy. Unfortunately, they only added one nose tackle in McKinnley Jackson. I just don't think if they're trying to do the same thing defensively without DJ Reader there, I think that's going to be a failure. So it's just a matter of how they kind of adjust with that. But that could have been a position that they could have been more aggressive, at least in free agency, bringing in a veteran. And that's exactly what they should have done with cornerback. I understand not drafting one high, but if the plan was a 5th-round rookie and moving Dax Hill to a position that he never played before, that's a really scary plan in terms of just adding depth to a position that they've relied on many a time over the past few years. Like, the 4th cornerback in the Bengals defense plays pretty significant snaps every single year. It's just a position that they've had to turn to, and the depth there is concerning, to be honest with you. So it's really relying on the recovery of DJ Ivey, who suffered a torn ACL in December, and the development of DJ Turner, who was pretty decent as a rookie to begin his rookie season, but really kind of fell off towards the end. So that is a position that I think is a little bit of cause for concern for sure.
We were also talking about whether or not that they were going to add some more size finally on the outside at corner. Well, no, it just seems that that's some coaches just, they zero in on what they want, the type of player they want, the type of size, speed, athleticism, whatever, and that's it. And they think it's fine. Are you concerned at all that they don't have a lot of size on the outside at corner?
Yeah, that was my concern with DJ Turner last year. And it's not like the physicality really impacted him, but there were a lot of plays where he was in the hip pocket of receivers in these routes, and this lack of length really impacted him not getting his hand on the ball. And there was just some passes that were just perfect from these quarterbacks where Turner just missed it and ended up being like a big play. Cam Taylor-Britt obviously brings enough size to handle your true X's of the world. And I think Dax Hill is like probably right behind him in terms of overall size and length. But again, I don't think anyone's expecting him to start at cornerback this year. I don't think people think that he's a better cornerback than DJ Turner necessarily. And obviously Mike Hilton is, he's my size out there in the slot, and that's worked for him so far, but he can't play on the outside. So yeah, I would say that's probably a cause for concern for sure.
Okay, before we wrap up, I've got to ask you about, since the timing is good, the schedule came out just a short few days ago. And what did you think about the Bengals schedule? Like, what's the story? What's the headline?
The headline is, Burrow has suffered injuries closer to the regular season in the past 2 years now, and that's severely impacted how quickly they can start. Now his injury sets him up well to participate in training camp and to start like his normal self, and that bodes well with what the schedule is, because they play the Patriots, the Chiefs, the Commanders, and the Panthers right out the gate. I think most Bengals fans would expect that to be 3-1 at the very worst, right? So when they've been 0-2 out the gate the past couple of years, really impacting how far that they can, in terms of playoff seeding, making the playoffs, like that's huge. So I think the ability to start fast is definitely there. There's the middle of the schedule is, I think, the most worrisome part, because they face like the Ravens, they go on the road against the Giants. They play the Eagles sometime in there. They play the Browns on the road. So there's definitely possibilities for them to kind of go back closer to 500 as the midseason comes along. And then they play, I think, like 3 games in a matter of 10 or 9 days in December, which is also a bit tough. But it seems like every team's got a tough December schedule. So it's not like it's any different than some of these other contending teams out there. So it bodes well for them to start faster than in previous years, so long as the health of the quarterback is there, and that's so important for gaining high seeding in the playoffs if they want to make it back to the playoffs.
So who do they play this year? Did you mention the NFC East?
Yes, they play NFC East and AFC West are their divisions.
Okay. All right. Well, that was pretty tough last year. Every year is different. I definitely don't. I think once, about maybe 25 years ago, I went down the road of, hey, let's go through the schedule and pick records, and I just stopped that immediately, because it's just the most ridiculous thing. I feel sorry for some of the writers. And look, sometimes even when you're doing videos, you're looking for material, and I would understand it if you have to do it. But it's just, everybody knows it's kind of silly, because especially in the NFL, it just changes every year. You don't know what's going to happen. And then just look at everything that transpired last year in the AFC with all the quarterbacks, including your own, that went down, changed everything as far as why it made Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs role and their ability to navigate to another Super Bowl a lot more easier. So, it's something that's just kind of fun, but it's I'd like to see anybody, like, actually, if they're ever good at it, because I doubt that they could predict what her schedule is going to be just by taking a look at it every year.
I don't like predicting games days ahead of time, let alone months. It's an impossible exercise. But I do appreciate, I think it's Warren Sharp who looks at, Vegas win totals, and that's how he calculates strength of schedule. At least that's more accurate than last year's records, because last year's records can just be thrown down the toilet.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm going to be on Ryan's show today. We're doing one where, because gambling in the summertime, that's all it's about. It's about win totals and futures. That's all I can do. So we're going to do that on the show today. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we could do that now. I got no problem with doing that now, because that's when you're supposed to take advantage of it anyway. If you have a good idea of handicapping the future, of course, injuries are one thing, but we're at the point now where there's not going to be much activity with trades or free agents. And a matter of fact, with my last two questions, if you had to predict a free agent, another veteran player to be added to the roster, do you have a name or a position?
I do. I think Adoree Jackson, the cornerback, makes a lot of sense. Kind of as an Eli Apple type signing. Eli Apple's signed, I think, for agency 2021. It's a former first-round pick who I guess at least worked with former Giants defensive backs coach Lou Narumo, who's now the Bengals defensive coordinator. So there's no coaching staff connection with Adoree, but the first-round pedigree, or at least the high-round pedigree, has always been a priority for them at the quarterback position. It's kind of why I was surprised that they took a cornerback in the 5th round. That was like an area or a range in the draft where they kind of ignored the position. It's usually always really early or really late, and 5th round was like a bit in the middle for me. But former first round cornerback, plenty of athleticism, albeit like we kind of talked about, not necessarily on the bigger side in terms of size. So there's another smaller cornerback kind of into the equation, but someone who's at least experienced at the position. Like, they don't have a ton of that behind their two starters. They have a guy that's never played the position before, a 7th round rookie last year in DJ Ivey. So just any type of veteran presence at the boundary cornerback spot, I think, is needed, and he obviously shouldn't cost too much at this point in free agency.
And then the last question, we talked about Brad Robbins not having a good rookie season. But anytime you draft a kicker, you definitely want to do everything in your power to make sure that this kid is given a chance to succeed. They have Austin McNamara right now, the only other player on the roster. Do you think is this where you thought they would be at this point, or are you kind of surprised they haven't added another punter? Is Brad Robbins going to get every chance to win the job?
I tried to look up the last free agent punter the Bengals have added, and I think it was someone in the 90s. So I wasn't expecting a free agent punter necessarily, even though I believe the guy from the Chiefs was available at a certain time. So yeah, I was expecting a rookie to come in and compete. I think with McNamara, I have no idea how to scout college punters, because last year Brad Robbins was really good at Michigan, and he ended up being terrible as a rookie.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was just the rookie wall, if it was a different football, or whatever the case may have been. With McNamara, though, the people who I trust scouting punters were saying that this guy was draftable in terms of just the metrics that matter. Really big dude as well. He's like 6'5". He's got a wide punting catch radius, I guess, which is the new term that I just kind of learned. But he's been okay so far in offseason workouts, and I do think that he's going to give Robbins a legitimate push in the offseason. And this, I think, is the 3rd consecutive offseason where they're going to have like a true battle at punter, and the incumbents, the previous 2 incumbents, have both lost. So whether or not McNamara wins, I think is just a matter of just him just outshining Robbins in the preseason and training camp, and not just in terms of distance, but in terms of placement, in terms of hang timing, in terms of just how does he help out the coverage teams and whatnot. It's not just going to be about who has the higher yards per punt or net average or whatever you want to call it, and obviously holding is a part of that too. So I think McNamara could have been drafted before Robbins got drafted last year, but he ended up not being drafted, and he really liked working with Darren Simmons. They met in the pre-draft cycle, and they developed a good connection. So that's kind of why he landed on the Bengals when they had other offers. So I think there's a good chance that he wins this job.
All right. And otherwise, it looks like everybody's back returning kicks. Jones, Trevion Williams. Is that what you see, or is there another player that could wind up battling who's on the roster right now?
No, those are the 2 that I would expect. I think it was. I'm trying to think, because I know Charlie Jones was the punt returner last year, and Trevion was more the kickoff returner. So I don't really see anyone that they've added. Maybe because we don't really know how these kickoff returns are going to look until they actually do it. So we don't know if maybe like a Chase Brown, who's a more faster, a runner of the football compared to Travion Williams, maybe he gets a shot as that kickoff return. It's just about who adjusts to it, the best and quickest. Obviously, punt returning is still the same, so I still expect that to be Charlie Jones so long as he's active. But I think kickoff return could be up in the air depending on who kind of handles it the best.
John, great job as always. Your show is available when?
So the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast will go live typically later in the week during the off season, and we have 2 shows on a weekly basis during the season. So you can catch us Thursday, Friday. We're pretty flexible in terms of just the summer schedule, but you can catch us up on YouTube, and also the Believe in Cincy podcast network on Spotify. We just got picked up by the Believe Network. We're really excited about that. So yeah, check us out. Resubscribe if you were subscribed to the Cincy Jungle page. But yeah, it's Believe in Cincy podcast network.
So it's the Believe Network.
Yes, sir.
So that's for just the NFL or for all sorts of sports?
We have multiple Bengals shows on there. All the Bengals shows that were with Cincy Jungle are now on Believe. So we got Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends. I believe our friend Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz have the show of their own. And obviously me and Anthony Cosenza, we're talking ball as well. So catch us all there. Awesome.
And also A to Z Sports, right? A to Z Sports.com/Cincinnati.
Yes, sir. Written work every single week at, like you said, A to Z Sports.com/Cincinnati for all your Bengals news and analysis.
John, look forward to talking to you during training camp, preseason, that kind of time frame. And I sure can't wait. That's, I'm not a summer guy, so I just can't wait for the season to begin as usual. I'm sure you might be feeling the same thing. I don't know.
Oh, we'll be begging for football when this time in June comes around for sure.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Greg.